Welcome back, dear traveler, or should I say, knowledge seeker? I've become quite accustomed to our special meetings. This place is blessed with your presence. Oh, you bring more gifts. Excellent. May I examine it up close? Astonishing artifact. Let's see. You may notice a peculiar fluidity of different colors, akin to a harmonious union, born of passion. According to some sources, artifacts as such are believed to be emerged to the surface after the eruption of Red Mountain, predominantly down the south of Solstheim. But nothing is truly definitive with magic objects, isn't it? Now, in order for me to open it, I need to ask it properly. Words too, you know, have unique power. Out there in Tamriel, the masters of Thum live in absolute silence so that they can better attune themselves to the way of the voice. One single whisper sound can shake the very foundations of the sky. Now, let us open it. This will go to temper. Let's see. It's very hot. Okay. 2 chapters in 1. A stroke of luck, indeed. Now, allow me to proceed with the translation. Please, come by later. Well, everything is in order, and I must say we have good progress. Would you like to hear it? Excellent. Make yourself comfortable. Chapter 2. It was a complete loss. The Cathirat had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in a caravan in just a few minutes' time. Decamus Scotty's wagon load of wood he had hoped to trade with Bosmere had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mat of dirt mixed with spilt wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group mourned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn. I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold onto my notes for my translation of the Noriad play bar, whispered the poet, Grief Malon. They'd probably turn on me. Scotty politely declined the opportunity of telling Malon just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse. 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. "Hoy!" came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmere emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. "Friend or foe?" "Neither," growled the convoy head. "Ah, you must be the Cyrodiils," laughed the leader of the group, a tall, skeleton, thin youth with a sharp Valpine face. "We heard you were en route. Evidently so did our enemies. I thought the war was over," muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmere laughed again. No act of war, just a little border enterprise. "You're going on to Fanesy?" "I'm not." The convoy head shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan. Just a fat profit loss to me." The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If this were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotty tried a different route and approached the Bosmere. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. "I don't suppose you'd consider escorting me to Fanesy. I'm a representative for an important imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought to your province. Patriotism, 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you have any left," replied the Bosmere. Scotty reflected that negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet, who appealed to Scotty for assistance. "I'm sorry, Griff. I only have 14 gold left over, not even enough for a decent room when I get to Fanesy. I really would help you if I could," said Scotty, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmere escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood. A never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennia's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, roomy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across falling branches and low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmere host moved so fast, the Cyrodiil struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. The Bosmere paused only for a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above, before moving on at the usual expeditious pace. "What are they so nervous about?" wheezed the merchant irritably. "More Cathy-rat? Don't be ridiculous," laughed the Bosmere inconvincingly. "Catch it this far into Valenwood? In times of peace? They'd never dare." When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotty felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exhaustion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week? Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent molds on the trees and in the musk below provided the only regular illumination. "Is it at all possible for us to rest and eat?" he hollered to his host up ahead. "We are near to Fanesy," came the echoing reply. "Lots of food there." The path continued upwards for several hours, more across a clod of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travelers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock. Agonizing foot by foot, the Bosmere escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotty kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Fanesy spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grad Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before the king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with the gorgeous crown of golden green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotty had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. "There you are," said the leader of the escorts. "Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province." Scotty was lost as to how to proceed. The side of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. He wouldn't know of an inn called... He paused for a moment and then pulled Urus' letter from his pocket. "Something like Mother Pasca's Tavern?" "Mother Pasca's?" The leader Bosmere laughed his familiar, contemptuous laugh. "You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Elisha Hall in the top house. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascott's tavern. If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel's Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the western course. This apparently struck the youth's friend as a very witty jest, and so it was, with the laughter echoing behind him, that Scotty crossed the writhing root system to the base of Fanesy. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or a bone would plummet from far above. So he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the sleek trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox belly. Scotty approaches the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. "I was wondering if you might take me to Havel's Slump." The man nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotty was 200 feet in the air at the crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of mass stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a sharing roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead, he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotty tipped the Fanesy platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascott's tavern. "Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there," the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. Mourned as everyone in Havel's Slump was reveille. Scotty walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the imperial city, there were sleek cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotty only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it. But it hadn't moved at all. He had, together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Fanesy walked. And considering its size, it moved quickly. Scotty rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotty had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and singer perched on an offshoot above the crowd. They were largely bosmere, true natives clad in colorful leather and bones, with the close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another, were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the tops of the crowd belonged not, as Scotty first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. "Care for some mutton?" queried a wizened old mare who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rocks. Scotty quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece and another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotty began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of a frothing white drink. He drank it and felt a quiver run through his body, as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotty asked. "Jaga, fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it, and a bit more mutton for another gold." Scotty agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker, Leader's Urus, the man who had told him to come to Valenwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty,
Scotty stopped looking for Urus. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fence work. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring, while the revelry continued all around the supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotty had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favor, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down, while a central spiral blooded vortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. He had found its meal, and it's going to finish it. It's over, thought Scotty wildly. I should have never left home. I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and walked my way back up. Suddenly, the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. "Good one," cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment Scotty lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters was scurried towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking and an arrow pierced the second insect. "Good shot," cried another voice. "Get the first one again. I just saw it move a little." This time, Scotty felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows had launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated, so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotty's body. When Scotty was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled of a great veteran of the fights, when asked, telling him the secret: "Whenever I'm in doubt what to do, and I have a shield, I stay behind it." Scotty followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remnants of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to a stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing his directions, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. "Didn't anyone ever tell you not to go to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the hobos if you drunks keep feeding them?" Scotty shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend, to Havel's slump. He was bloated and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into Mother Pascout's tavern, a dung place, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. "My name is Decimo Scotty," he said. "I was hoping you have someone named Urus staying here." "Decimo Scotty?" pondered the fleshy proprietress, Mother Pascotti herself. "I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it." Chapter 3. Mother Pascout's disappeared into the sordid hall that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Leodis Urus' familiar scroll. Decimo Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the tree city, and read: "Scotty, so you made it to Fanesy, Valenwood. Congratulations! I'm sure you had quite an adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore. As you probably guess, there is a town river called Athi I'm at. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, 'cause these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Haha, meet me down here as soon as you can, Urus. So, Scotty pounded. Urus had left Fanesy and gone to some place called Athy. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally be Athai, Aphai, Othrai, Imthrai, Oltha, or Krakamaka. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at the successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Catherad, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmeri, half starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascoe, who had been watching him curiously. "I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of a recent conflict with elsewhere. It's called something like Athi, Athai." "You must mean Athay," she grinned. "My middle lad, Vigil, he manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went?" "Yes," said Scotty. "Do you know the fastest way to get there?" After a short conversation, an even shorter ride to Falanesty's roots by way of the platforms, and a jog to the river bank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge fair-haired Bosmere with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Balfix, but even Scotty, with a sheltered life, could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old Imperial sloop. 50 gold, and we'll be in Athe in 2 days' time," boomed Captain Balfix expansively. "I have 9 golden pieces," replied Scotty, and feeling the need for explanation, added, "I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here." "9 is just as fine," said the captain agreeably. "Truth to be told, I was going to Athe whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes." Decimo Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper scraps, lard, ink, high rope meal, marked for cattle, tar, fish jelly. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo. But in an hour the anchor was up, and they were sailing downriver towards Athe. The green-grey water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, Scotty drifted to sleep. At night he awoke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. "Why are you going to Athe, if I may ask?" queried the boss mare. I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial City, where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission, to negotiate some contracts. Scotty took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Khajiit.
It's been a hard 2 years.
The captain nodded his head.
Though, I suppose good for me, and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think they're going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that?
Scotty shook his head.
I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader and businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted.
Scotty said he was sorry to hear that, and then lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotty awoke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotty rise, he offered his flagon of Jagger. I learned my lesson during reveille at Western Cross. The captain laughed, and then burst into tears.
Ah, I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know. I could go back to it. But Bada knows, not after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man.
Scotty helped the weeping mare out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we?
Oh,
moaned Captain Buffix miserably.
We made good time. Arthur's ran around the bend in the river.
Then it looks like Arthur's on fire, said Scotty, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted round the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened, skeletal remnants of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of the town, the figures of Khajiit soldiers bearing torches.
Banda bless me,
slurred the captain.
The war's back on.
Oh no, whimpered Scotty. The sloop drifted with the current towards the opposite shore, away from the fiery town. Scotty turned their attention there, and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor, away from the horror. There was a shadow of leaves in two of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground, armed with bows. They see us, hissed Scotty. And they've got bows.
Well, of course they have bows,
snarled Captain Buffix.
We bossmen may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret. You bloody bureaucrat.
Now they're setting the Urus on fire.
Yes, they do that sometimes.
Captain, they're shooting at us with flaming arrows.
Ah, so they are,
the captain agreed.
The aim here is to avoid being hit.
But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignified in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotty grabbed Captain Buffix and they leapt overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the bossmare into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotty, who was already swimming as fast as he could towards the bend.
Master Decimus, where do you think you're swimming to?
Back to Fanesy, cried Scotty.
It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athe. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenos. Maybe they'll give us shelter.
Scotty swam back to the captain, and side by side They began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many in Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the imperial province was. Had he been raised in Mir Korup or Atimon, he might have been doomed. But the imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat, even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Baflik's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Zilla River was fairly temperate, and after a fashion, even comfortable. The boat's mare's strokes were uneven, and he'd stray closer to Scotty and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotty looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno, with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on the left, all looked fair, until he saw a tremble in the river reeds. And then what caused it? A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts, with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares. And they were watching the two swimmers and keeping pace.
Captain Baflix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one. We'll be parboiled or eaten, Scotty whispered. Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me and we'll float on our backs for a while. Anyone who's had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmere moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Greenos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, the Captain Baflix was gone. Scotty drove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further, but there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question. He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiiti, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmere refugees, he gathered, even before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remnants of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Sancha tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Katharat or Orms or any other bleeding Khajiiti. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You like the meat though, sweet from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotty did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or mare, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasoning had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate, a sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. There were the survivors of both the villages of Greenos and Athe. The war was on every person's lips. Why they had the Khajiiti attacked again? Why? Specifically directed at Scotty, as the Cyrodiil. Why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in these provinces? "I was to meet another Cyrodiil," he said to a Bosmere maiden who he understood to be Athe. His name was Leodes Urus. "I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him." "I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athe when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindisi inland, in the jungle. I'm going there tomorrow, so are many of us. If you wish,
You may come as well. Decomo Scotti nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island. And somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep.
Well, the story starts to unfold. How thrilling. That's it for now. I'll be waiting for your return. In the meantime, I wish you good night. See you next time, dear traveler.